Princess Arya stood at the highest balcony of her palace, staring out over the vast, glimmering city of Zyferia. The skyline stretched far beneath her, with silver towers and sleek floating ships zooming through the sky. Zyferia was a world of power, and Arya, its ruler, had earned her title. She was a princess, but more than that, she was a warrior, a strategist, and a leader like no other. For years, Arya had been hailed as the strongest in her kingdom. She had trained with the fiercest warriors, mastered the art of combat, and developed brilliant strategies that had expanded the empire across many star systems. She wore her power like a second skin, and she carried the weight of her people's future on her shoulders. Yet, despite the admiration of her subjects and the unwavering loyalty of her soldiers, there was something that always gnawed at Arya. It wasn't fear of the future or doubt in her leadership. No, Arya was certain of her abilities. What troubled her was the hollow feeling that came with it. As the ruler of Zyferia, she had everything: wealth, power, and respect. But none of it seemed to matter when she stood alone in her palace, looking out at a world she had conquered but never truly understood. Today was another day of routine, a day for formal meetings, military strategy discussions, and endless reports. Arya had grown tired of the predictability of it all. Every decision she made seemed to be for the good of the empire, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that she was merely a figurehead. She didn't know what it felt like to be truly free, to live without the crushing weight of responsibility constantly pressing down on her. It was during one of these long meetings that Arya received the news of her next mission. It wasn't a task that she would typically have chosen for herself. The council had decided that it was time to negotiate with Earth, a planet that had been a thorn in Zyferia's side for years. Earth's leaders had been resisting their attempts at forming a galactic alliance, refusing to fall under the Empire's influence. Arya's father, the Emperor, believed that Earth's defiance could not be tolerated, and it was Arya's responsibility to resolve the matter. She was to travel to Earth, meet with their leaders, and convince them to join the Galactic Federation. At least that was the official reason for her trip. Unofficially, the mission was seen as a way to show that she could handle even the most trivial of tasks. As Arya prepared for the journey, she could not help but feel disdain for the mission. She had fought wars, conquered planets, and faced challenges far greater than anything Earth could offer. Why should she waste her time negotiating with a primitive species? But duty called, and even the most reluctant of rulers had to play their part. The journey to Earth was swift, and soon Arya found herself standing in the heart of a human city. She was taken aback by the energy of the place. This planet was unlike any she had ever seen. The air was thick with the scent of food, and the sounds of people talking, laughing, and living their lives. Zyferia, for all its grandeur and power, lacked the raw, unrestrained energy of Earth. It was a strange contrast to the cold, calculated order of her own world. Arya's arrival was met with mixed reactions. Some humans were in awe of her presence, while others were wary of her intentions. The local leaders, who had arranged her visit, were eager to begin negotiations. But Arya couldn't shake the feeling that they were only interested in her power, not her ability to understand their world. It was at one of these meetings that Arya first met Daniel, a human who was nothing like what she had expected. While the other humans were formal, offering her polite smiles and meaningless words, Daniel was different. He didn't bow or grovel. Instead, he looked at her with a steady, almost defiant gaze. "You're not here for peace," he said bluntly. "You're here to control us." Arya was taken aback by his boldness. How dare this human speak to her this way? Her reputation as a ruler was built on respect and fear, yet Daniel was neither afraid nor impressed. His words stung, but they also intrigued her. "You don't know anything about us," Arya replied coolly, trying to regain her composure. "You're just a small part of this galaxy, a tiny speck compared to the empire I represent." Daniel met her gaze without flinching. "Maybe, but we're not your property. You don't get to decide what happens here." For the first time in her life, Arya felt a spark of something she couldn't name. It wasn't anger, nor was it the need to prove herself. It was something else, a sense of challenge. Who was this human to speak so freely? And why did his words make her question everything she had known? The meetings continued, but Arya found herself thinking about Daniel long after they were over. His words lingered in her mind, and she couldn't help but wonder what he saw that she didn't. The more she watched him, the more she realized that he was different from the others. He wasn't intimidated by her status or her power. He didn't see her as a princess or a warrior. He saw her as a person, someone who could be challenged, someone who could change. As the days passed, Arya began to see Earth through Daniel's eyes. The humans were not the helpless, naive species she had imagined. They were stubborn, yes, but they were also resilient. They fought for their freedom, even when it seemed impossible. In some ways, they reminded her of herself. She had fought for everything she had, clawing her way to the top, proving herself time and time again. But unlike the humans of Earth, she had never had to fight for her freedom. It had always been handed to her, the crown passed down from her father, the empire hers by birthright. Perhaps, for the first time in her life, Arya realized she had never truly earned anything. One evening, as the sun set behind the tall skyscrapers of Earth's capital city, Arya stood alone on the balcony of her temporary quarters. She gazed out over the bustling streets below, her thoughts drifting back to Daniel. What was it about him that had stirred something deep inside her? Why did she feel as though, in some strange way, he had turned her world upside down? Her life had always been defined by strength, by the power she wielded and the respect she commanded. But now, for the first time, Arya wasn't sure if that was enough. She wasn't sure if it ever had been. Princess Arya walked through the crowded streets of Earth's capital city, her silver boots clicking on the pavement, the noise of the city around her blending into a background hum. The human world was unlike anything she had experienced before. The air smelled different, earthy and alive, with scents of food, flowers, and the faint perfume of human sweat. She could hear laughter, shouts, and the bustling of activity, and yet there was something about it that felt real, honest. It was strange to her. On Scifi, everything was ordered, controlled. Every action was calculated, every move a part of a greater plan. The people were loyal, not because they loved her, but because they feared her and respected her power. There was no room for emotion, no room for error. But on Earth, Arya noticed something different in the way the humans interacted. They were loud, sometimes rude, but there was a warmth to their chaos. They were free. For the first time since her arrival, Arya felt a pang of discomfort. She wasn't used to feeling uncertain. She was the princess of an entire empire. Her strength and power were unquestioned. But here, among these humans, she was beginning to realize something she had never thought about before. She felt small. And worse, she felt out of place. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Daniel. Since their first encounter, he had been impossible to forget. His boldness, his refusal to be intimidated by her, had shaken something deep within her. No one had ever dared to challenge her like that, not even the fiercest generals or the most respected council members. Daniel wasn't impressed by her title. He wasn't interested in her strength. Instead, he had seen through her, and that terrified her. She had spent years mastering the art of combat, earning the respect of her people by being the strongest warrior in the galaxy. But Daniel had questioned that strength. He had questioned everything she had believed about power, and even though she hated admitting it, a part of her was grateful for it. She had always seen power as the key to everything, but now she wondered if there was something more to leadership, something deeper that she had been missing. Arya's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to find Daniel walking towards her, his expression unreadable. He had always looked at her as if she were a puzzle, trying to understand her in a way no one else had. That look in his eyes unsettled her. "I didn't expect to see you out here," he said casually. "I thought you'd be stuck in meetings with the government officials." "I needed a break," Arya replied, her voice soft but firm. "This place is different from what I imagined." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Arya paused for a moment, unsure of how to express what she was feeling. "It's chaotic," she said finally. "There's no order here, no structure, yet somehow it seems to work." "Yeah," Daniel said with a small smile. "That's Earth for you. We may not have the kind of order you're used to, but we manage. We get by, and we fight when we need to." Arya studied him for a moment, wondering how someone who had grown up on such a small, chaotic planet could speak so confidently. "You really think your people can defeat Scifi? You think you can stop the Empire from taking over?" Daniel didn't flinch. "I don't know about stopping your empire, but I do know one thing: we'll never give up. We'll keep fighting no matter what." Arya shook her head, confused. "You can't defeat us. We have the technology, the power, and you have no idea what it means to fight for something," Daniel interrupted. "You think your power is everything, but it's not to us." His words stung more than she cared to admit. Arya had never considered the idea that strength might not be everything. She had always believed that power, dominance, and control were the ultimate tools for survival. But Daniel's words challenged everything she thought she knew. "Maybe you're right," Arya said quietly, more to herself than to him, "but it's hard to see past what I've been taught." "You don't have to see it all at once," Daniel said gently. "It's not something you can just understand overnight. But trust me, there's more to this world than power and control." For a long moment they stood in silence, the noise of the city swirling around them. Arya's mind was racing. She had spent her entire life focused on one thing, being the best, being the strongest. But here, standing next to this human, she felt something she had never allowed herself to feel before, doubt. And though she tried to push it away, it wouldn't go. It lingered, pressing against her thoughts. "What happens now?" Arya finally asked. Daniel shrugged. "Now. We keep going, we keep living, we keep fighting. And maybe, if you're willing, we try to make this world a little better together." Arya was quiet for a moment. "You really think you can change things here? You can make your people see the bigger picture?" Daniel met her gaze, a spark of determination in his eyes. "I don't know, but we'll try. We'll fight for what's right. And maybe one day your empire will see that we're not just some primitive species to be controlled. Maybe you'll see that we can stand on our own." Arya looked at him, unsure of what to say. There was a fire in Daniel's eyes that she hadn't expected. He wasn't afraid of her, not at all. And that realization unsettled her more than anything. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one in control. "You really believe that?" she said, more as a statement than a question. "I do," Daniel said, his voice calm but unwavering. Arya looked out over the city again, her thoughts swirling. She had come to Earth with one goal, to force the humans into submission. To show them that they were no match for the might of Zyferia. But now, as she stood there, she wondered if there was more to this mission than she had first believed. For the first time in a long while, she was beginning to question everything she had known. Power, strength, leadership, control. Were they really the answers to everything? Or was there something more? As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the city, Arya knew one thing for certain. Her journey was far from over. The questions she had were only beginning to surface, and she didn't know if she was ready to face them. But she knew one thing. Daniel had turned her world upside down, and somehow, despite her better judgment, she was starting to see him as more than just a human. He was challenging her, pushing her to think in ways she had never thought before. Maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to see that there was more to leadership than power. And perhaps Earth had something to teach her after all. Princess Arya stood on the edge of the balcony, looking out at the vast city below. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange, purple, and red. The lights of the city were beginning to flicker on, and the hustle and bustle of the human world below seemed endless. It was a world so different from Zyferia, where everything was organized, precise, and controlled. Here there was chaos, but it was a kind of chaos that seemed to pulse with life. People moved quickly, shouted to one another, and laughed. It was a world that didn't care much for the order that Arya had grown up with. And yet it was alive in a way that Zyferia sometimes was. She felt a deep unease inside her. The walls that had surrounded her for so long, walls of power, walls of control, were beginning to crumble. Daniel had gotten under her skin in a way no one ever had. His words, his thoughts, even his actions, challenged everything she had believed to be true, and the more she tried to push it away, the more it lingered. "I don't understand this place," she muttered to herself, her fingers gently gripping the railing of the balcony. "Why does it feel so real?" As the cool night air brushed against her skin, she closed her eyes and allowed herself a moment of quiet. Everything in her life had been calculated, everything from her training to her decisions, her leadership, her victories. And yet here she was, in the middle of a world that ran on something much less predictable: emotion. The humans, so unrestrained, so full of heart, were both alien and familiar to her. It was then that Daniel appeared behind her, his familiar footsteps echoing in the quiet. She didn't need to turn around to know it was him. "Still thinking about what I said?" Daniel asked, his voice calm and steady. Arya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she let out a slow breath. "I didn't expect to be so unsettled," she admitted, turning to face him at last. "Your words, your way of thinking. It's not what I'm used to." Daniel smiled a little, but it was a soft, understanding smile, not the cocky grin he often wore. "I figured. People don't usually question the power they have, but you're doing it. That's why I'm here, right? To help you see what's beyond your empire." Arya's gaze softened, but her mind remained in turmoil. I came here to teach Earth a lesson, to show them the power of Zypheria, but I think I'm the one who's learning something. I don't know if I like it." "You're not supposed to like it," Daniel said gently. "Sometimes learning the truth about ourselves isn't easy." The silence between them stretched for a moment. Arya looked at Daniel, trying to find the words to express the confusion she felt, but words didn't seem enough. The feelings inside her were far more complex than anything she could explain. "You're right," she said finally. "It's not easy. For the first time in my life, I don't feel like I have all the answers, and that scares me." Daniel took a step closer, his expression serious but kind. "It's okay to be scared, Arya. It's okay to not have everything figured out. No one does, but you're here now. And maybe you'll find the answers you need, not just for Zypheria, but for yourself." Arya's heart fluttered in her chest. There was something in the way he spoke, in the way he looked at her, that made her feel like maybe she could find those answers. Maybe the journey wasn't about proving herself to others, but about discovering who she truly was. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't sure if she had to carry the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders alone. Maybe she didn't have to be the fearless princess anymore. Later that night, as the moonlight bathed the city in a soft glow, Arya sat in her quarters, the quiet of the room pressing in on her. She felt the weight of the past few days, of everything she had been taught and everything she had always believed, pressing down on her. There was so much to consider. The humans, their way of life, their resilience, everything was different from what she had known. She couldn't stop thinking about the way Daniel had looked at her when she admitted her confusion. It was the first time anyone had seen her for who she truly was, beyond the crown, beyond the title. And it scared her because she wasn't sure if she was ready to face it. But then, another thought crossed her mind. What if she didn't have to be the perfect ruler anymore? What if, just for once, she could be herself? What if she didn't have to hide behind strength and control? Arya shook her head, trying to push away the thoughts that were forming. She couldn't afford to be weak. She had a responsibility to her people, to the galaxy. But even as she told herself this, a small part of her, the part that Daniel had awakened, whispered that maybe there was more to her role than she realized. Maybe true leadership didn't come from fear, but from understanding. Maybe it came from the ability to admit when you didn't have all the answers. As the days went by, Arya found herself spending more and more time with Daniel. Their conversations became deeper, more meaningful. They didn't just talk about politics or war. They talked about life, about dreams, about what it meant to truly be alive. Daniel showed her a side of Earth that she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just a chaotic mess of people fighting for survival. It was a world full of potential, of passion, of hope. And slowly, Arya began to understand what he had meant when he said humans fought not just for survival, but for something more. They fought for freedom, for connection, for a better future. It wasn't power that drove them, but something else, a force that Arya had never really considered: love. Her time on Earth was meant to be a diplomatic mission, a way for Arya to show the humans their place in the universe. But now, as she stood in the midst of their world, she was beginning to see things differently. She could feel her walls breaking down, one conversation at a time, and it terrified her. She wasn't sure what to do with the feelings that were growing inside her. She wasn't sure how to reconcile the princess, the warrior, the ruler with the person she was starting to become. But as she looked into Daniel's eyes, she realized something. For the first time in her life, she was seeing herself as more than just a ruler. She was seeing herself as a person, and that scared her even more. The days passed quickly for Princess Arya, each one bringing new discoveries about herself, about Daniel, and about Earth. As the Princess of Zypheria, Arya had always been used to power, control, and certainty. Her entire life had been built around those things. But here on Earth, things were different. There was no perfect plan to follow, no set rules to obey. The humans didn't live by the same cold calculations that governed Zypheria. They lived by their emotions, by their hearts, and it was something that Arya couldn't ignore anymore. She stood on a balcony overlooking the city, the cool night air filling her lungs. Her thoughts were heavy, weighed down by the decisions she knew she would soon have to make. Zypheria's empire was vast, and her father, the emperor, expected nothing less than complete obedience from every planet under their rule. And yet, Earth remained defiant. They hadn't yielded and they hadn't broken. Arya had come here to force them into submission, to show them the strength of Zypheria. But now, after everything she had seen, she wasn't sure that was the right way to approach the situation anymore. "You're quiet tonight." Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts, and she turned to find him approaching her from behind. His face was soft, his usual smile replaced by a more serious expression. It seemed like the longer she spent on Earth, the more Daniel's presence felt like a constant in her life. "I've been thinking," Arya said, her voice far less certain than it had been before. "About everything, about what I came here to do and what I've learned." Daniel stepped closer, his hands in his pockets. "That sounds serious. What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "I thought I understood power," she began slowly. "I thought I understood what it meant to lead, but now I see that there's more to leadership than strength. I see it in the way the humans fight, not for control, but for something more, something you can't just command." Daniel nodded but didn't speak. He understood more than Arya had expected. "I've always been taught that strength comes from control," she continued. "From domination, from power over others." She shook her head. "But now I see that I've been looking at it all wrong. You don't need to control people to lead them. The strongest leaders don't demand respect, they earn it. And the humans here, they've shown me that." Daniel's eyes softened. "It sounds like you've had a big realization." "I have," Arya said, almost laughing at herself. "I've spent my entire life thinking that being a ruler meant being the strongest, the most feared, but that's not true. The strength that really matters is the strength to listen, to understand, and to care." Daniel walked up to the edge of the balcony, standing beside her. He didn't say anything at first, but just stood there looking out over the city, his presence as calm and steady as the earth itself. Arya turned to him, searching his face. "You were right. You told me that there's more to this world than just power. And now I understand what you meant. But what do I do with this new understanding? What do I do when I know I can't go back to being the ruler I was before?" "You don't have to go back," Daniel said quietly, turning to meet her eyes. "You've already changed. And you can't unlearn what you've learned. But that doesn't mean you have to give up everything that makes you who you are. You can still be a leader. You can still be strong. But now maybe you can be strong in a different way." Arya looked at him, her heart pounding. "What if they won't accept this change? What if Zyferia won't accept it?" Daniel's smile was small but sure. "Then you show them, you lead by example, just like the humans do. You make them see what you've learned. It might take time, but it's worth it." Arya turned back to the city below, her mind racing. What Daniel was saying made sense, but it also scared her. She had spent her entire life following a certain path, and now that path was suddenly unclear. For the first time, she didn't have all the answers. "I came here to conquer," Arya said, her voice low. "I came here to force the humans to join Zyferia, but now I realize that what I wanted wasn't the right thing. It wasn't the right way to lead. And yet I'm afraid that if I go back to Zyferia and tell my father that I've changed my mind, he won't understand. He won't see the value in what I've learned." "You don't have to do this alone," Daniel said softly, his voice full of warmth. "You have choices. You don't have to listen to everything your father says. You're a leader, Arya. You can make your own decisions." Arya felt a sense of peace settle inside her, a calmness that she hadn't known she was searching for. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she could stand on her own, like she could make a decision that was her own, not one forced upon her by duty or by others. She could choose her own path, but the decision wouldn't be easy. If she chose to return to Zyferia with her new ideas, she knew her father would see it as a betrayal. He wouldn't understand the changes she had gone through. But could she go back to the way things were? Could she continue to rule with the same cold strength and control that she had always known? As Arya thought about it, she realized something. She didn't have to choose between the leader she had been and the leader she could be. She could combine the two. She could bring the strength of Zyferia with her, but she could also bring compassion, understanding, and humility. She could change the way her people saw leadership by showing them a better way. "I know what I have to do," Arya said, turning to Daniel. "I have to go back to Zyferia, but this time I'll lead differently. I'll show them what I've learned, and I'll do it my way." Daniel nodded, his expression serious. "I believe in you, Arya. I always have." With those words, Arya felt a sense of determination fill her. The future was uncertain, but she wasn't afraid. For the first time in her life, she was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed were filled with difficult decisions. Arya spent time with the humans, learning more about their ways. She saw how they supported each other, how they valued freedom and connection. She saw how they fought for what was right, not just for themselves, but for the greater good. and she began to understand what it meant to be truly strong. The time finally came for Arya to leave Earth. As she stood at the edge of the ship that would take her back to Zyferia, she turned to Daniel one last time. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Daniel smiled, his eyes bright with understanding. "You don't need to thank me, Arya. You did this. You changed yourself, and that's the hardest thing anyone can do." As the ship lifted off, Arya watched Earth grow smaller beneath her, but she didn't feel sadness. Instead, she felt a sense of peace. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, Arya felt ready. She was going to change Zyferia, and she was going to lead her people in a way that was true to herself. And that, she knew, was the only way to truly be a leader.